Welcome to The Megyn Kelly Show, your home for open, honest, and provocative conversations. Hey everyone, I'm Megyn Kelly. Welcome to The Megyn Kelly Show. Oh, we have a great show for you today. I'm really excited about the discussion you're about to hear. We're going to talk about the rise of the illiberal left, how it happened, what it looks like, and what we can do to stop it. And I think all of our guests today are of the left, at least 2 out of 3. I asked 2 out of the 3. And so these are people who are left-leaning, who are objecting to the craziness that's taken over our country and the Democratic Party and our cultural institutions. And so we're going to get into how we got here and exactly how it's manifested. First, with Christina Hoff Sommers, who I've long admired. She's a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, which is a conservative think tank, but she's a Democrat. But she calls herself a feminist, but she says she's a freedom feminist. She's an equity feminist, meaning she's not against men and she's not about infantilizing women. So you'll hear from her first, and we're going to get into Simone Biles, and that's how we'll kick it off. I'll have little talking points for you on that. And then we're going to be joined by 2 guys who have just put out a film not long ago called Better Left Unsaid. You've got to watch this movie. You'll see Coleman Hughes, you'll see Steven Pinker, you'll see Douglas Murray, you'll see Noam Chomsky, all sorts of deep thinkers on how we arrived here. And they really get into sort of the extreme left, how it's taken over, and its historical roots in Marxism, Leninism, socialism, communism, and how those experiments worked out. they kind of show you. And it's parallels to what we're going through right now. We're going to be joined by Kurt Jaimungal. He's the director and host of this movie. And Desh Amila, who is the producer. He's a pal of Coleman's. And these guys have gotten tons of pushback from big tech on trying to get the good word out about this film. So we are happy to help them here. You guys need to check it out. Better Left Unsaid. And we'll give you all the deets on how you can find it. But first, before we get to Christina, this. I want to begin today with Simone Biles. I've been thinking a lot about how I feel on this, and I didn't want to knee-jerk defend her because I've long been her fan. I interviewed her while I was at NBC. Nor did I want to pile on, just because when the mainstream narrative is so strongly in one direction, I tend to get suspicious. Is she a pathetic quitter? Or a heroic trailblazing mental health warrior? Or are both of these narratives wrong? We've seen some extreme reactions to her decision to quit the team competition and then the individual all around at the Tokyo Olympics. Charlie Kirk called her a selfish sociopath. That's bullshit. Come on. But what she did this week was not heroic either, in my view. First of all, she is clearly struggling. Unlike with Naomi Osaka, there is zero reason to doubt Simone's word. Remember, Osaka only landed on the "I have social anxiety" excuse for refusing to do press conferences after she had been condemned by her fellow players, the Grand Slam tournaments, and by pundits chastising her for equating her annoyance at reporters' questions to actual mental health struggles. Her sister gave up the truth when she posted on Facebook, and then later deleted, that Naomi doesn't suffer from depression or mental health problems. She just didn't like the negative questions about her game. Then came the blowback, and then suddenly Naomi went with, "I have crippling social anxiety that makes me want to avoid the press." Obviously a fig leaf to patch up her growing PR missteps. But the media was so excited that a diverse woman on the world stage was leaning into alleged mental health problems that all conversation was shut down and only one narrative was then allowed. All praise Queen Naomi. Her dishonesty was soon made clear by the multiple magazine covers she posed for and interviews she gave both before and after her so-called press anxiety crisis. Not to mention the Netflix documentary about her life that we now know she orchestrated. And let's not forget the release of her Barbie. Competing in Tokyo on behalf of her native country, Japan, Osaka went on to lose to the 42nd seed, and she went home without a medal. But let's get back to Simone. How did she explain her decision? Well, her message was a bit all over the place, and that is in part why I think she's getting criticized. She said it was tough being, quote, head star of the Olympics. I mean, Simone wears a goat on her leotard, clearly embracing the idea that she is, in fact, the greatest of all time, which she is. But expectations were set accordingly. Then she blew it on the vault, essentially relegating her team to at best second place. And she, the team captain, refused to finish the competition. She explained she was not having as much fun as she wanted at the games, that she had wanted this competition to be, quote, from myself and not, quote, to please other people, which not surprisingly made some other people feel unimportant to Simone, namely some of her countrymen who sent her to represent America, not to compete for herself. But she also said her head wasn't in the right place and that she had realized this is not worth getting hurt. She said she wanted to walk out of that arena, not be carried out on a stretcher, which has happened to others before. Young gymnasts have been paralyzed, leading to death when things go wrong in that sport. Who the hell are we to say, do that life-threatening routine anyway? This isn't tennis or a press conference that an athlete is expected to attend. This is high-flying aerial vaults and backward flips on balance beams and jumps that defy gravity on the floor routines. Moreover, Simone Biles has earned our deference to her in making these decisions. Remember, in gymnastics, there's Simone, and then there is everyone else. No one even comes close. Her daring feats on the vault are so extraordinary, judges struggle to even understand how to rate them. Silver is like gold to the gymnasts competing against her because they know she's in a league of her own. So when she says, "This time, I couldn't," we should believe her and accept her decision to say, "It wasn't safe for me today." And you know what? We're forgetting something. There is a history here. Simone Biles has been abused by this damn sport and the leaders of it for years. She was a victim of the evil team doctor Larry Nassar, a serial child molester who hurt Simone for years along with so many of her friends and teammates. She said publicly that one of the reasons she came back to compete this year, at, I guess it's considered old in gymnastics, age 24, was that she thought officials would brush the abuse story to the side if a survivor were not on the floor. She was out there for a lot of complicated reasons, and she was in the very setting that led to her serial abuse in the first place. Is it any wonder that she wasn't really in the right headspace? So Simone Biles deserves our full support. But supporting her does not mean one needs to celebrate this development. It's sad. It's a valley in the highs and lows story of an incredible athlete's life. The superhuman Simone, as it turns out, is human, after all, as Juliet Huddy said the other day. And on this particular day, she faltered. A huge, huge part of sports, especially at this level, is mental grit. She's had it her whole career. Let's not forget, she won those 4 gold medals in Rio back in 2016, weeks before the Nassar story broke. She's the best there's ever been in a sport in which female athletes' health and well-being has been notoriously worth nothing to those in charge. The Washington Post had a story out just today outlining how terribly USA gymnastics officials have allegedly behaved towards Simone and the other Nassar victims. It's worse than we knew. Covering up for Nassar, dodging the athletes' demands for information ever since. All of which helps explain why on this one day, the GOAT couldn't win. She deserves our understanding, our empathy, and our thanks to her for a lifetime of making us proud of the stars and stripes on her uniform. And we can and should be saying, next time, Simone, we hope there will be a next time. You'll get them then. But that does not mean we have to celebrate this as empowering, which is where the media seems to be going. She put her mental health first, say those arguing that this is a trailblazing moment. Well, yes, she did. But one can understand how the American people who put her on that team so she could compete and win don't feel like celebrating this particular moment. Deadspin called this, quote, the most impressive move of Simone's career. The most impressive? No. But that comment is indicative of a larger issue in our society right now where we seem to want to cheer on any surrender to upset. Outside of Simone, this is what we're doing lately. Whereas we used to celebrate toughing it out. Take the military, for example. We can't have our Navy SEALs putting mental health first instead of jumping into the helicopters to go kill bad guys. Our frontline medical workers don't have that luxury when they walk into COVID-infested hospitals and nursing homes to take care of the sick and dying. Bailing on a commitment in order to put one's mental health first may indeed be necessary and something which one's mom will applaud. But the folks who are counting on you to do your job do not need to feel that way. They are allowed to feel a bit sad and disappointed. And they will clap as you walk off after a bad vault, but they don't have to clap when you quit, or in this case, because you quit. We don't need to support our young female athletes by celebrating their surrender to self doubt or upset. We seem to want to lionize people's retreat from emotional challenges these days. Those who say I can't get lifted onto a pedestal because they said I can't. Is that the example we want to set for young girls in particular? Can't we get to the point where we no longer shame women for self doubt, for being emotional, or for having a rough time mentally, while not deifying them when they give in to those feelings? Simone Biles is as tough as they come. She can handle some disappointment from the fans. As a world class athlete, no doubt she expected it. She's also entitled to our empathy for the hell she and too many other American gymnasts have been put through at the hands of those who were supposed to be protecting them. For now, I think the message should be, we are rooting for you, Simone, and the porch light remains on for your inevitable comeback. Joining me now, Christina Hoff Sommers. Christina, I'm so glad you're here. You're the perfect person to discuss this with, and I'd love to get your thoughts on Simone Biles.
I agree with your analysis. I thought there is a difference between what happened with Simone Biles and with Naomi, and she is an athlete of such brilliance, and her past feats are enough to earn her a place in a permanent pantheon. And she's human, so it would seem quite appropriate to defer to her judgment and move on. What's annoying is more the reaction in the media with this fixation on safetyism, and they keep pointing out how dangerous the sport is. Of course it's dangerous. We know that. Most of us couldn't come near to doing these things. And yet it's almost as if the mood is that people shouldn't be doing these things. And I don't get, well, I do, because it's a fixation. I wrote a book called One Nation Under Therapy with the psychiatrist Sally Sautel. And here we are, a therapeutic culture, and that's the narrative favored by many in the prestige media.
All right, so why are we doing that, right? Why, in any day past, we would have said, oh gosh, I love Simone Biles, so bummed to see that happen to her. I hope she comes back for the individual. Why did we go to, yes, the most historic, best, bravest moment of her career?
Well, we are deeply into this culture of therapy where the road to salvation is therapeutic self-understanding. Now, as Sally, my psychiatrist co-author, and I wrote, there's nothing wrong with psychiatric self-understanding, but it's limited in terms of the world that it opens to you, because safety and cautiousness and self-awareness and so forth, all very important. But there's also glory, and there's also spectacle and pursuing greatness, and we admire that as well. But that all of those ideals seem to be falling away for many, and all they want life to be like a permanent therapy session, and they're desperate for, I guess, some kind of role model of safetyism and therapism. I doubt that Simone wants to be that. There's no evidence that's going to happen, but there we are.
I know. Well, she said she was inspired by Naomi Osaka, which I was like, oh boy, if I were Naomi, I wouldn't be too pleased to hear that, because I wouldn't want Simone Biles bailing from the Olympics on my shoulders, especially because I don't believe I think Naomi got there as a PR cover, as opposed to Simone, who I believe is wrestling with something.
Right. And also, I do think this is very bad for young women. We have the idea this wouldn't be happening if it were a male athlete. And so there is a tendency to use a different standard. Let's bracket the particular case of Simone Biles and its particularities, which I'm, like you, quite empathetic. But overall, the culture right now, with this, I think we're seeing a kind of feminization. And if you were to generalize about sex differences, women do tend to be more cautious and more fearful. There are psychological studies. You ask people, like, would you go up in the space shuttle? And far more men than women say yes. Men take more risks just physically than women. And from the earliest age, boys are more likely than girls to end up in the emergency room from having done crazy things. But you can have a culture that is too extremely male and martial and aggressive and violent and people dying and so forth. Obviously bad. But I think there's another extreme where you can become so obsessed with safety and caution and hyper protectiveness, overly cosseted. And I see us moving in that direction, even with the response to recently, with the recent policies on the COVID vaccine, where we're erring on the side of maximum safety without considering the other values that may be sacrificed.
It's so true. And I read a lot when they write like this about women, and race is a factor too. It's not just women, it's Black women, from Simone Biles to Naomi to Meghan Markle. Um, that historically society's been notoriously unforgiving of them and held them to an impossible standard. And that indeed may be true. And especially when it comes to expressing weakness, or, that women aren't allowed to shed a tear because we're known as hysterics. You know what I mean? That we're
Right,
sort of,
right.
we're fighting back against this typical way we've been portrayed publicly. And I get all that. I get all that. But I just happen to think the solution to this is not to then celebrate any meltdown, any failure, any, implosion on the vault during the Olympics. The standard, the solution in my view is, let's just hold everybody to the same standard. She messes up on the vault, you feel disappointed, you root her on, forward we go. There doesn't need to be this, oh, look at the delicate little baby who somehow like, she's the toughest among us. She's already competed after having been a sexual assault victim repeatedly by that pervert Dr. Nasser. She has nothing to prove. I don't understand why we have to, like, to me, I worry because we're showing our daughters, if you feel any sort of hesitation, any sort of vulnerability, any sort of a weakness, you will be praised for surrendering to it.
Yes, and what worries me too is they're encouraged to focus on their their emotions. And there's pretty good research that there are a lot of benefits to being stoical. And
Yes.
if you are too obsessed with your emotions, I saw one study that looked at a cross section of adolescent girls and boys and asked them, how do you feel when you talk about your problems? How do you feel when you share your troubles with another person, with your parent, with a counselor? And almost all the girls said they felt better. And the boys, the number one answer was they thought it was weird and it didn't make them feel better. And people said, oh, this puts the boys in danger. They're not in touch with their emotions. They don't talk about their feelings. They're not self-aware. But it turned out the girls have far more depression. And the researcher Amanda Rose, thought that it's possible that a certain amount of stoicism is conducive to well-being and happiness. And if you become an obsessive ruminator, that may be what depression is just obsessive focus. You can't escape the focus on the self. And there may be just something protective in male stoicism. And this researcher and her team concluded that we have to reconsider this idea that always sharing emotions, always being in touch with your feelings, being a feeling-centered society may actually be detrimental to well-being.
Can I tell you, this resonates with me because I have found, I used to believe, talk about your feelings all day long. I did. And the more adversity I suffered in my life, the more I realized it was helpful to me to process it when it happened, try to put it in a box and understand what had gone down. And I'm not averse to crying and, showing emotion. And I think part of the
Right.
beauty of women is that we're more emotional and we can be a softer place to fall. And that's great. That's one of the reasons we're so attractive, I think.
Right.
However, sort of, I believe in cognitive behavioral therapy is essentially where I'm going, where it doesn't make sense to obsess on it. It's there, it happened. If you can move it off to the side and focus on something else, especially during the trauma, that's not repressing it. That's not letting it kill you. That's getting past it. And that has worked really well for me.
I am such a proponent of cognitive behavioral therapy because it's problem solving. It shakes it and says, well, okay, you have some bad psychological habits. You're catastrophizing and you're oversimplifying and you're engaging in your paranoia, and just be more reasonable with yourself. And a good cognitive therapist, I wrote this a long time ago. I'm not promoting that book. It was before its time, unfortunately,
Yeah.
because we really weren't quite there the way we are today. I remember I went on Comedy Central, and was talking about the book, and they just were looking at me like I was crazy that teachers, at the time they weren't using red pens because that was thought to be harmful to students' feelings. And I remember
Boy.
John Stewart said, "What do they do? Like put potpourri on the papers and things?" And they weren't doing that. But Stewart just thought this couldn't really be happening, that we were obsessed with feelings, and that, the Girl Scouts were giving awards for candle therapy. I don't know, strange
Oh
things were
boy.
going on. Tug of war was becoming tug of peace for kids, everything to tone down and make the environment more reassuring and safe. And um, that was what we talked about in that book. But now it's all sort of it's coming into being. It's coming
Yes.
to reality.
Yes. I was saying the other day, I just feel like all of this messaging is part of the wussification of America, where we're, the messaging we've gotten, the ads to recruit people into the army are now about how diverse, the woman had two moms. And it's like, okay, that's nice, but it's not relevant to whether you can perform in the army. And whenever a public figure expresses any sort of a struggle or a weakness, I mean, we lionize them. And I understand we want to make people who are struggling with mental health issues or what have you feel not alone. I like that. And
Yeah.
I believe in that. I believe in that because for too long, no one ever did it. And so you'd feel like, oh my God, I'm the only one who has this completely effed up family or background or, my own issues. So I like that. But it seems like we've tipped it too far in the other direction to where now the messaging is the more screwed up you are, the farther you will go.
I know, and we're not being reasonable with children. I mean, we're so afraid that girls will get eating disorders, which are terrible things. But on the other hand, because we're so afraid, we're not being truthful to them about the dangers of obesity. And there's now this sort of fat acceptance movement. I get it up to a point, but if you look at the data, it's pretty clear that you're better off, doing what you can to stay in a reasonable shape. And
Hmm.
I'm finding that there's just they're going overboard to indulge every young woman and be reassuring. And by the way, I should add that the mental health movement in our book, I meant to say this before, we strongly supported, for those who are in distress, cognitive behavioral therapy. It has
Mm.
one of the best records of success, but not to just become obsessively an obsessive ruminator. And
Well, on
it's
on
probably
that
good to
subject,
cultivate.
what do you make of the point I was trying to make about hardship versus mental health troubles? Like, I just feel like mental health is now being used as a catch-all for any sort of mental struggle.
If you talk to personnel in our universities, they are claiming that high percentage now of college freshmen come to them with mental disorders, and that it used to be they always had a school psychologist. Well, now they have to have teams of psychologists because there's so many kids under duress. And I have to wonder if they've been brought up to think that any adversity is it means when you're feeling bad about something, that that's a catastrophe and it must be addressed, and you have to go to an authority to fix it. And it's almost as if we haven't given them resources just to cope with the ups and downs of everyday life.
Yeah, that's called being human. Well, a lot of people
Yeah.
feel sad, feel anxious, worry, that's normal. And even if you do it a lot, it's normal. It doesn't mean you have a mental disorder. And I just feel like mental health could be used to cover just about anything. I don't want us to see us swing so far in the other direction that we use it to get out of anything tough. It's just a free pass to get out of doing tough things. I look at our military and I do look at those frontline workers who have been through hell this year. They'd never show up for work if we allowed that.
Right. Well, and the other thing is, I don't want to, and of course we don't want it to sound like we are saying that people shouldn't seek therapy. Of course they should. And in fact, I worry about young men who have serious mental health disorders, because I think they are underserved by uh, the psychology profession. It's very much
Mhm.
catered to the therapy needs of women. And there are some it was largely in Australia, where they became aware that young men were just sort of outside and not getting the mental health uh, treatments, some of them badly
Mm.
needed. And they came up
Mhm.
with some solutions. I don't know if they are working, but in this country, it's not acknowledged as a problem. In fact,
Mm.
the therapeutic community is kind of carried away with a political agenda in which you could send a young man to a psychiatrist and she'd talk to him about toxic masculinity
Oh,
or
no.
male supremacy or patriarchy. Can you imagine?
Up next, we're going to get into the medical community now apologizing for using the term pregnant women. Barry Weiss and Katie Herzog had an exclusive on this. It was great. And we'll talk to Christina about that right after this. I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy for a long time. I love my therapist, and he is non-woke. So that's good. That works for me. But he does tell me stories about what he sees in the hospital, about how he's the one who first told me you're not allowed to say this patient is a 42-year-old female. You cannot assume gender based on the breasts and the appearance of the person sitting there and the fact that, she's got female sex organs. No. And we saw this just this week where Barry Weiss, who's got this great Substack column, had Katie Herzog write in it. Both women have been on the show. And Katie was writing about what's happening in the medical community right now. And she revealed that even in the medical community right now, there's blowback for doctors denying biological sex. So professors, she caught one on a tape, somebody gave it to her, apologizing for saying male and female, and writing about how the students are policing the teachers because activism has taken over medicine. And the one example they gave in particular, Christina, was here's a professor at the University of California. This is a quote from a tape that Katie got. He says, "I don't want you to think that I'm in any way trying to imply anything. And if you can summon some generosity to forgive me, I would really appreciate it. Again, I'm very sorry for what I did. It was certainly not my intention to offend anyone. The worst thing that I can do as a human being is to be offensive." I mean, the worst thing? Okay. And then the offense that he committed, using the term pregnant women.
I know you're not supposed to say breastfeeding. The preferred word is chest feeding. It's so absurd that it's hard to believe. And I'm having a hard time um, imagining these. I've been in universities all my life, and the professors in the medical school were always struck me as being very sober, no nonsense, empirically based scientists, and they seem totally unprepared to deal with this wave of fanaticism
Mm-hmm.
that's just sort of sweeping over the culture, and they're caving, and it's probably just a small coterie of little fanatics, little red guards in the first year class, or that's what I imagine, and they're giving into them.
Right.
This is very bad, and medicine doesn't. I mean, already the CDC is losing some credibility. The medical community, uh, and then they do something like this, which is going to make them a laughing stock.
Mm-hmm. I don't get how, in trying to be supportive of a very small community, the transgender community, very small numbers wise, you've got to take away from all women, from all girls. We can no longer be pregnant women. We can no longer breastfeed. You're not even allowed to say mother in administrative regulations and rules that the Biden administration is passing right now. They've gotten rid of those terms because they find the term mother offensive. And that's what loses support for transgender people, right? It's like if you feel like you somehow find the term mother offensive, then I'm going to fight you. Then I'm going to fight. So I feel like the approach is boneheaded.
No, I agree with you. I'm for a long time been supportive of people who are genuinely transgendered, and I think it's an authentic human rights issue, and that movement has legitimacy, of course. But there are many who have glommed onto it. I don't think. I mean, I think that there are probably a lot, particularly young women, who are mentally unstable, and they are moving towards this because maybe they get interested in it from being online or from friends. And there are far more girls now saying they're trans than ever before. And in ways which suggest that it's a contagion of some kind of
Yeah.
hysteria.
No signs of being trans at any point prior to the 16-year-old awkwardness.
Exactly. And or it may just be girls who are gay. And
Right.
you can be a lesbian and but you don't undergo treatments to become masculinized. That's again a very very small group of people, but it's being mainstreamed. And as you say, it's become an occasion for just being coercive and authoritarian towards the public. And this is not going to help the cause. It's infuriating to people. So I've heard transgender people say this as well. I mean,
A hundred
they're
percent. I
they're
always
not
try to
all
make the point. This
radical.
is their activists. It's not them. The trans
Exactly.
activists are just pains in the ass. I mean, really, they're so loud and obnoxious, and I'm convinced they do not represent trans people who are reasonable and just want to be loved and supported. But tell me, let's talk about the feminist role in all of this, because this is a field in which you've found yourself for a long, long time. I love that
Yeah.
you talk about yourself as a young woman saying, "Okay, I'm a feminist." And then you kind of looked into the background. You were like, well, this is pretty Marxist in its approach and it's pretty demonizing of men. And I'm not sure this label works for me. And then you did battle with the feminists of the time. But I love that you've kind of come full circle with them. You may find yourself in the same camp as the old radical feminists who are kind of pushing back against some of the stuff we're talking about. So talk to me about feminism and how you view it and how your own journey has gone.
I have always been a feminist. My mother was a feminist. My grandmother was a suffragist. And I was surprised as a grad student and in philosophy, and then as a professor for many years, that my colleagues in philosophy, in feminist philosophy, and some of the radical feminists in the university held views that were sort of shockingly extreme and just gratuitously angry and denigrating to men, even to women. They didn't like what they called the gender system. So whereas I was a feminist that wanted to achieve equality with men, their goal was to overthrow what they called the sex gender system. And that they thought it was all just an artifact of culture and could be taken apart, taken down. And we were all just sort of gender neutral um, beings. Well, it turns out that's not true. There's no evidence, good evidence to true. The preponderance of evidence suggests that there's that there are differences between men and women. There are some people for whom the, the the stereotypes of sex don't hold true, but for many of us, say they are true. Women do tend to be, as I said before, a little more cautious and aware of danger, and more risk averse, and but also more nurturing and higher emotional intelligence, better reading skills. Women are better students overall and better rule followers. Boys tend to be more rule breaking. And as I said, there are exceptions. I'm talking about the rules. Well, my colleagues in feminist philosophy would not accept any of this. There's some that don't even accept that men are stronger than women. They think that's an artifact of culture.
Hmm.
So I started tangling with them. And it has gone full circle because there were the radical feminists, and they would at least come out and fight. A lot of feminists just didn't like debate, and we could never, they thought it was too contentious, and they wouldn't debate me. The radical feminists would, but I've become friends with them because they don't like many aspects of the trans activist movement, and they have been so viciously targeted by
Yeah.
trans activists, and they are called TERFs. Trans exclusionary radical feminists. That's a term of denigration, and they've been they've been courageous coming out and saying. So I admire them for that. I disagree with them with many things, but I like the spirit. And so now the women I used to debate, I don't agree with them. I think they're very hostile. They think a lot of very negative. They hold a lot of negative views about men, and I think I disagree with them to this day. But overall, I'm in their court right now.
And one of the problems with, I don't know if it's feminism or a misguided attempt to lift up young women, is how unfair the process can be to men. It's one of the reasons I don't call myself a feminist. And it's exemplified in what's happening on college campuses right now with the lack of due process for men who get accused, for lack of a better term, again, in the Me Too movement. They get accused of sexual assault or some sort of sexual misbehavior. And thanks to Obama, we had almost no due process rights for men on campus. Trump and Betsy DeVos put them back in place. And now Biden is trying to undo it all and return us to a day and age in which men, if you got accused, you were done. You were convicted. They lowered the standard to just a preponderance of the evidence for you to be found guilty. It's just 51% likely. They got rid of your right to cross-examine your accuser, that you didn't have a right to a lawyer in the proceedings. It was usually a kangaroo court staffed with people who are victims' rights advocates. So that's the deck is stacked for these young men, and they're fighting right now to go back to it. And I think if that's feminism, if that's what it means to be, a strong feminist woman standing up for other women, I don't want that. I don't want that comes at the expense of due process and boys and men.
No, and as a classical equality feminist, I never wanted that, and I'm horrified that in the name of feminism, we now see these illiberal policies. What's been going on for many years in feminism, but now we see it certainly all over the universities and increasingly in the workplace, of these authoritarian censorship of an extreme kind, where a man, well, now anybody can get in trouble for just a slightly mildly risque joke. All sorts of policing the environment for the slightest hint of sexism, and we're just becoming less free. And I don't see how that helps women. I don't see how that helps anyone. But it's the bidding of a radical group that has been there all along in the universities. And a lot that I see that's happening, people say, where did this wokeness come from? A lot of it came from the schools of education that have been teaching this for years and years, and they don't believe in intellectual diversity. So they don't hire professors that might have a different point of view. So it's pretty much, a one-party system increasingly in schools of education, but now throughout in many universities, but even in the younger grades, because the schools of ed are teaching the teachers. And so in the classrooms, the kids are getting a steady diet of this sort of far left view of the world. And it's distorted and empirically unfounded. But if you challenge it, the kids have been taught to see you as a male, you're supporting male supremacy and patriarchy, or toxic masculinity, and I tried to stop it, and I had great allies. I had Camille Paglia and Katie Royce, and the ACLU was there at the time. You had people, Wendy Kaminer, and we were fighting it, and I thought we won. But then something happened, and now, the ACLU's gone over to, there seem to be hardline feminists.
Yeah, that's
that
right.
aren't
It's
that
one step
sympathetic to
forward,
free speech and due process.
2 steps backward. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're a Democrat.
That's the thing. I've always been, I've come from a very liberal family. My parents were so liberal, they left California and moved to Vermont at a certain point, much after I grew up. But we lived in Topanga Canyon, and sort of a hippie socialist family. And it's in my DNA. And I'm a self-hating Democrat, to put it that way.
But don't you think, you tell me, but I hear all the time, I feel like the country's going through something, and in particular, people on the left are going through something. People who are lifelong Democrats are starting to realize, I don't know what I am anymore. The Ronald Reagan line, because he used to be a Democrat, I didn't leave the party left me. It just seems like the party's changing dramatically. The Republicans had a big change with Trump. It's like, wait a minute, what do we don't care about spending anymore. We don't like the messaging on trade changed, isolationism. And I feel like something's happening on the left right now where there's a cleaving between the far left and the center left.
Well, also, when I was growing up, humor was on, sort of seemed to be something the left liked, and it was like conservative grouches that wanted censorship, and conservative grouches that wanted to stop people's fun, and people who were liberal seemed to be just kinder and wanting policies that giving people a break, giving people a chance. I just associated that with a kind of liberal spirit. But right now, I see so much cruelty. I don't think that the majority of people on the left are cruel. And I can tell you, my parents they've passed away, but they were the kindest, loveliest people. But that spirit of liberalism that they had, and it was what I thought was what the left was supposed to be about, that it's been replaced by something that's full of censoring scolds and people that want, to do away with basic rights. And it's become unrecognizable. And I think the left has a problem with it. Maybe it's just there are some very cruel people, and they opportunistically have taken advantage, and everyone else is frightened now. But this has to change, because it's extinguishing a spirit of humanity and kindness and forgiveness. I mean, in this cancel culture, there's no forgiveness. You
Mm-hmm.
are even for the smallest infraction. I've seen people destroyed. And going back what you were talking about, the due process, I have met young men who've been caught up in this, in unfairly and wrongly accused. It is life annihilating. They're one day they're happy sophomores at Tufts University or something, and the next day at home, shamed, and no one will talk to them. And when you hear what happened, even when I've heard cases where both sides agree on the facts, the idea that he's called a rapist is absurd, because now, I hope we don't go back to that. But before the changes under Betsy DeVos in the Trump administration, before those changes, if two young people had sex and there was alcohol, he could be called a rapist. And I once debated a professor at the University of Virginia, and I asked her, I said, well, what if two people, a boy and a girl, are drunk and they both report it? Could you say they raped each other? And she said, yes. And I just found this whole thing ridiculous. Sex, while under the influence, has been known to happen, even on, honeymoons. People imbibe.
Right.
But there's this idea that if a young woman has alcohol, she is incapable of consenting. I can agree if she's just blacked out drunk or something. Of course, no reasonable person would doubt that. But boys have been convicted when they've both had a couple of margaritas.
Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. So that's back to what we were saying before. There's no reason to treat us like we're these delicate, wilting flowers who can't bear the consequences of our own decisions. That's not equality. That's,
I know,
treating
that
us like
the
we're
idea
on a pedestal.
that we have to be protected from male vulgarity. I call this fainting couch feminism. It's not a feminism I recognize. It's hyper puritanical, when feminism was supposed to overthrow that kind of puritanism. It's also authoritarian, it's coercive, and it's unkind. I don't a feminism without mercy. And
Mm.
it can be very vicious, and we've seen it, and it makes women that, and I've seen this happen with students. So you bring in a young woman who is, curious and full of excitement, and that she takes one of these hardline gender studies courses and becomes paranoid and angry at men and angry at the world. And they encourage rage and, these extreme emotions. I just think it's psychologically unhealthy. And I think we are dealing with the results of, by now, a few decades of this kind of teaching. And again, most college students don't come out bitter and enraged and politicized, but many of them do. And I think it's especially a problem at our more elite schools. And then they take these twisted ideas with them into the workplace. And we all thought, oh, when they get to the workplace, reality will kick in and they'll have to change. No, they're changing the
Hmm.
workplace and making it an impossible sort of censorious place where people are honestly afraid to say anything.
No, it's terrifying. It's terrifying because, I get asked a lot. You probably get this too from women, how are you so strong, right? How are you so strong? They see public battles I've had with, powerful people and they say, how do you hold yourself? And I say the truth, which is I went through a lot and then I just kept getting up and getting out of bed and doing my job again. Like you just don't surrender to it. It actually doesn't take that much. Just keep forging forward. Just keep going. And now we're at this place where it's like, no, I have to control everybody else's behavior. I have to stop the behavior in the first instance, which is not realistic. We can't control everybody's behavior. Bad things are going to happen, difficult things. And when it happens, then I need to lean into my victimhood and look for other people to feel sorry for me in order to feel like I matter. Well, that's BS. Those people will abandon you just as soon as you take the wrong position. Why don't you just figure out how you can convince yourself you matter and subject yourself to tough challenges so you know in your heart how strong you are?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And one thing that I found when I started taking a stand, and I believe me, I wasn't brave. I did it. I just thought I should do it. I didn't realize that I was going to be vilified and called all
Yeah.
sorts of names. I was surprised and I was frankly a little distressed. And I lost friends, especially when in early on when I was challenging some of the hardline feminists in my field. I lost some friends, but then I got better friends, new friends. And
Yes.
so it's true that you may now, when things are so politically charged, you do risk ruining some friendships, but um, you enter a new world with people with whom you can speak freely. And who
Yeah.
wants to practice this sort of preference falsification and self censorship? And it's just exhausting. And especially when now you want to say something that's completely reasonable. And I think most of my positions on feminism are not only effective, but compassionate. I don't think that the radical view has proved that it's a more benevolent way to see the world. Some people say, oh, right now we're just undergoing a big revolution and a new generation is taking over and they have better ideas. This is what progress looks like. I don't think it's what progress looks like. When I've
Mm-mm.
seen real progress in the past, it was liberating and it brought joy. And this is people are shutting down and people are being punished, and it feels like we're going to look back at this moment the way we look at McCarthyism.
Yes. You're so right. That's such a good point about there's no joy to this movement. It's alienating and small and vindictive and mean. No one feels good at the end of this. This is not empowerment. In a nutshell, it boils down to, I've said this before, but my daughter was talking about this t-shirt. I have two sons and a daughter. Um, Girls rule and boys drool. And I was like, oh no, 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 no. That's not empowerment for girls, right? Like as somebody who married a man and made two more, I understand that the key to lifting my daughter up is not to put my boys down. And I heard somebody say once that the answer to this problem we're having right now with feminism and otherwise is parents of both boys and girls. And that's one of the reasons why I almost feel like the answer to like the cop problem and the with violence against Black men is Black male cops or Black female cops, like people who can understand and be empathetic to both arguments, but not far left activists who want to shame everybody out of any pushback or any sort of opinion. So, can you tell me though, because I watched you did a tour with Roxane Gay, who is a more, I don't know, traditional feminist, I don't know, a radical feminist, I'm not sure what we call her. I don't know what you call, but so you debated her, and it was nuts to me because it devolved to people calling you a white supremacist. It was like, wait, what?
I think she
So
called
how?
me that. It was this debate in Australia, and when the organizer, Desh Amila, asked me, I said, "Well,
He's
feminists
coming on
usually
next, by
don't
the way.
like."
He's my next guest on this show, but keep going.
Oh, give him my regards. I'm so fond of him. He's a wonderful young man, and he had this. He was this idealist. He thought, "Oh, we'll bring two feminists from different schools because she's a little more of a like a, I guess, a critical feminist, a radical feminist, and I'm more moderate." And you would debate, and we'd come to some understanding. We didn't come to an understanding. She wouldn't even look me in the eye. And then she behaved like uh, such a diva. She decided she didn't like Desh as the moderator because he asked her some hard questions. And she just thought that was out of line. And so she insisted that we had two debates. One was in Sydney and one in Melbourne. And she insisted at the Melbourne debate that we get a different moderator, and she was going to choose her. And
Oh
then
man.
she did. The reason he did it, he wanted to have the video to distribute, and she wanted no videos released and threatened lawsuits, and it was absolutely insane. It was just gratuitous theatrics. But what I found most interesting is that she she did to me what radicals claim that oppressors do to them. She completely denied my humanity, otherized me. She just wouldn't even look at me. I was just,
Mm.
it was such it was ridiculous and distressing that she had so much hatred towards another person whom she didn't know. And I don't know why she agreed to debate, because we could never really have an exchange. She just sort of dismissed me out of hand. And then the audience, 2/3 were her fans. So every time I spoke, they would jeer and hiss. And
Mm.
then she would speak and she'd get riotous applause. So it was not a fun experience. And this fall, I speak on campuses a lot, and I expect I'll be visiting campuses, but things have become so charged and people are so full of hate. Like when I debated the radical feminists in the past, we had heated debates, but it wasn't hatred. There was just excitement and disagreement. Sometimes we'd go out for drinks. Nobody goes out for drinks anymore with the adversary.
Mhm.
You're there to fight a war, I guess.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, this is so interesting because I've experienced this just in my job, and you've been out there leading this whole fight in a lot of ways for women for many many years. But it's to me it's distressing to see
But
somebody
have
like
you ever
you
hated people? I mean,
be called these
they hate
names.
me. So, they really, and I see them on Twitter sometimes talking, wishing I would die. And I just am not aware of ever thinking that way about other people, even people I disagree with.
Never.
I really would
Never.
love to vanquish them in an argument. I don't want them to get hit by a car. They want that. They talk about that. Now, of course, these are Twitter trolls, but and Roxanne talked a little bit. She was just so full of hatred,
Yeah.
and I don't think a politics of rage and hatred is going to take us anywhere except down. And everywhere where these hardline policies, these censorious policies based on radical race theory or radical feminist theory, every time they're tried out, they destroy, they tear institutions apart. They don't make them better, kinder, stronger, more effective. They weaken them. Just look at what happened. I think it was a great warning what happened with the Women's March. All these women from all across the political spectrum came out. Huge Women's March. Where is it now? You know
Mm.
what happened? It was intersectional, and they began attacking each other. The Jewish women were pushed out, and then a kind of radical feminist group came in that somehow were allied with Louis Farrakhan. Figure that out,
Yeah,
because he's
that's
the
right.
biggest sexist and homophobe you can imagine. It was twisted and perverse what happened to the leadership of the Women's March. But I've seen that happen. It's happening in university departments. I think some version of it is, this toxic philosophy is happening in our elite institutions, and they weren't prepared to fight it. They weren't
Mm.
prepared to fight the anger, the rage, just the fanaticism of not seeing nuance, not seeing details.
And everything is seen through that intersectional lens. I mean, if you know very well, and I've experienced this many times, if you deign to criticize a woman, a black woman, forget it. Immediately, no matter what you're criticizing. You could say, I think she got that math problem wrong. They'll go to the race place and the gender place, and if sexuality or gender identity is relevant too, they'll go there too. So you just have to be prepared for them to bring these things in, even if they have absolutely nothing. And the people who are trying to lecture everybody on how to speak and how to feel and how to be empathetic and how to be an ally, to your point, this is just an example that happened to me last week, but I was critical of Naomi Osaka. I don't believe her claims, and I'm entitled to that belief as a journalist and a lawyer who's trained for a living in detecting deception. Somebody got reported on Twitter for threatening to, I think it was slit my throat, some sort of manner of murdering me, having to do with my throat. Okay, so I'm supposed to listen to you about how the appropriate way is to speak and respect others. I don't think so, right? To your point of otherizing and just attacking in a way that feels disturbing. It is disturbing.
Well, the intersexual activists do to others what they claim has been done to them. Nobody's doing it to them. And that's the fallacy, is they are claiming this dire, they live in this world with their dire oppression. And many of them are among the most privileged people I've would ever hope to meet.
Hmm.
And
Right.
the educated at the most elite institutions and wealthy, and all of the benefits, and yet they look at us and claim that and carry out this kind of this demonization, that it is not happening to them. They don't have a history of that, of being oppressed in that way, the elites at least that I know, and yet they don't seem to have that self-awareness. I don't know how this happened. I really don't. It must be something. I honestly, as a philosopher, most of my career, I believed that if you really could marshal the right evidence and good arguments, you would change people's minds. But it's harder to change minds than I thought. So I don't know what's going to be effective, but I do worry there's a contagion of hysteria, and I think we need something stronger than logic, but I'm not sure what it is. I don't want to be
Mm.
coercive, but I don't want them to take over.
This is the perfect segue into Desh, who's up next, in his film. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Better Left Unsaid, but it is about how we got here, and it's the best look I've seen yet on how we got here. So, thank you for everything. Thank you for the great talk and your wisdom and fighting the good fight for so long in such a brave way, and for the perfect transition. Christina Hoff Sommers, big fan.
Thank you, Megyn.
Up next, we're going to be joined by the two guys behind the film Better Left Unsaid, Kurtjai Mungal and Desh Amila. These two guys have tried to figure out how we got here. They've looked at the history behind it, the rise of the movement, and as I was saying with Christina, the cleaving of sort of the center left from the extreme left, and how that's left us here, how the rest of us are now supposed to deal with this because they've taken over these cultural institutions that we all have to deal with, universities, big tech, medicine, you name it. So you'll find it fascinating, and these guys are interesting. You don't want to miss it. It's up in 1 minute. First a quick ad, and then Kurt and Desh. I'm very excited to talk about this movie. I just watched the whole thing. I made my husband watch it too. I said to him, the highest praise I can give a film, which is it made me feel the way the movie No Safe Spaces made me feel, which is just sort of gripped and immobile in my seat watching it. And what an amazing forensic deep dive into how we got to this crazy place in not just our country here in the United States and Canada, where you guys are. I know, Desh, I think you're from Australia. So, I mean, it's happening all over the globe. And this is the first deep dive I've seen into how we got here. So can we just start with this? As I see it, this taps into something I've been saying all along to my friends on the right. Stop dividing this battle into left and right. This is not a left and right battle. This is about woke and unwoke, reason and unreason. I think rationality and irrationality. And you seem to be tapping into that because you're talking about the rise of the extreme left. You talk about the extreme right too, but the extreme left is a relatively new phenomenon, the way it's fighting this battle. And so how did you begin? Let me ask you that, Desh, as the producer of the film. How did you begin to deconstruct what they are doing?
Well, when you say they're doing, I see this as somebody who's on the political left on almost every issue. This is my people. And when I started seeing people around me policing their words and sort of being scared of talking about certain subject matter, I first started noticing it in 2014. And then the rhetoric got louder and louder with regards to certain subject matter, and people started throwing words around like civil war, and what's going to happen to the Western civilization if this happened this way, or Trump is the next Hitler, all of that. And I was like, this sounds pretty insane. See, I come from Sri Lanka originally, and I was born during a civil war, and I witnessed what a real civil war is, and I know exactly the literal meaning of some of those words. So I've always had this worry because the freedoms that's been given to me in the West, I cherish them. Absolutely. I know what can happen to journalists or people who are interested in subjects that a government not interested in people knowing, talking about. If that happens, you will disappear. And so I first made a film called Islam and the Future of Tolerance. And after that, I've been wanting to make a film about political extremism, not necessarily pinpointing the way Kurt wrote this film. Um, Kurt approached me at the very early stages of making the film, and I was like, this is definitely what I wanted to be speaking at this point in our history. So that's how I got into this film.
Kurt, you do a great job, by the way, on camera. You're the star of the film, our narrator. You walk us through everything, and you do a great job of it. You're obviously very smart. Your math background showed. I was I was paying very close attention to make sure I understood everything you said. But you do walk us through the history of Lenin and Marxism and communism, and talk about how these young people who look at that as some sort of an ideal. Um, and even some BLM activists, like the statement they put out about what's happening in Cuba, and this idealistic version of communism, socialism, and so on, kind of stops. It stops examining that ideology very early into any time it's ever been tried for a reason. Can you talk about that?
Sure. When I was approaching the film, like you mentioned, it's true. I have a training in math and physics, and so my approach was an analytical and precise one, or as exact as I could be. I tried to derive what are the motivations for the extreme left, as well as also delineate what constitutes the extreme left, because there's disagreements there. Some people call them the radical left, and so on. I tried to do that from a historical perspective with communism, as well as some philosophical roots with social constructionism and postmodernism and so on, other buzzwords that are now becoming familiar.
And they refuse to learn from the past. It's like we have lots of examples of this being absolutely disastrous. Why are you leaning into this ideology as a solution to anything? But it is the basis. If you look at Black Lives Matter and some of the extreme left ideologies that are getting pushed, it does sound very Marxist and has its roots there. And you spend a long time looking at the intolerance on college campuses, and not only about how it is a minefield for, quote, cis men, meaning guys who see themselves as guys, who have no gender confusion whatsoever, but how the professors, who now in so many instances have these crazy intolerant views, can tweet out things like, I'm pro-white genocide, with absolutely no blowback. It's fine. That kind of messaging is fine. You can call the entire white race white nationalists. So you will not be penalized. You will probably get tenure. And this is the environment that guys and whites and everybody's walking into now. It explains a lot of what we're seeing when they get out of school.
Yeah, it's funny because I'm a first generation immigrant, and you would think that what I'm saying would hold some weight to the extreme left because they count that as a factor in your favor. But because I'm so against the extreme left, I'm what's considered to be white supremacist adjacent, even though I'm apolitical. I don't consider myself to be part of the right or the left.
Right. But you're not allowed to be. You make that point, and I love that point because I am a registered independent, but you can't be. They don't care. They don't care if you're a liberal. I have friends who are lifelong flaming liberals. That's how they describe themselves. And they still get kicked out of the club because you have to buy into the entire ideology. You have to reject biology. You have to accept all the tenets of BLM and so on. Otherwise, you're not in the club. So I do wonder, you tell me, Kurt, whether those people need to realize, don't bother trying. Just figure out what you actually believe, because there's no membership in the politically correct club unless you sign on to all of it.
Yeah, it's a shame because what happens is you're so excoriated if you don't believe in, let's say, if you don't believe in all 10 of their tenets, then what happens is, because the larger media system, I know there's Fox News, which has a right bent to it, but the larger media system generally has a left-leaning bent to it and is politically correct. And so then they censure you. And who embraces you is the center right or the extreme left, but which breeds a bit of bitterness in you toward your prior team, the left. And then the left, or the extreme left, they're spearheaded by the extreme left. So it seems like it's the left in general. The left will then say, the extreme left will say that you're a member of the extreme right, just because you disagree with them.
Right. Well, and it is funny. I've noticed this before, that the people who get it the worst tend to be people who are, let's say, on the center left or even center right. They'll get it worse than people who are established far left or far right. Like they don't get as mad at somebody like a Sean Hannity, a host on Fox News who's very conservative, and we all know that, as they would at even somebody like me or somebody like you, more center right or center left people who they think should be listening to them and who they see as smart and able to articulate a view that might be appealing to the very folks they're trying to convince. So you tell me, because I want to talk about in particular how hard this is for people to navigate. It can happen on college campuses to anybody who doesn't sign on, but it can also happen well beyond that. And the example you use in the film with Douglas Murray, who I idolize, I just love Douglas Murray. He's so brilliant. He talks about David Cameron of the UK and how there was absolutely zero empathy for David Cameron's loss of his son because of David's skin color. Here's a soundbite from your film.
The Guardian says in its editorial that David Cameron, the setbacks he had in his life were not real setbacks because of his privilege. And they included the fact that his first son died. And they said, even that, him sitting at the deathbed of his own son, wasn't as bad as it would be for other people because he had privilege. You end up judging the extent to which a father has the right to mourn his child because you're playing a privilege game.
So you tell me, Desh, whether there's any reasoning with people who see the world like that, because this is an ongoing debate we were having. Do you try to reason with folks who subscribe to this ideology, or you just try to defeat them?
Well, that example is gut-wrenching, obviously. When the world is presented through the binary lens that you are fighting ultimate evil, right? You present the other side as Darth Vader. It's collateral damage. But I do generally think, although it sounds as completely that kind of thinking, groups like that there is no redemptive quality. I do believe in our ability to reason with people. It might take a while, but I do think there is a way out. Example would be how people were talking about, especially on the left, about Islam, and it is whether it had anything to do with what was happening in the world. Some wouldn't even want to make the connection that 9/11 and an ideology had any connection. It took almost, I would say, 2 decades before people started accepting it, but that was because the attempts of people like Sam Harris and Majid Nawaz, a number of people who were on the political left, continue to press that matter. So I do think, by people like us talking about this matter, that they will see eventually have to, because there is no sustainable way forward for a movement to really stick to their guns, like this example, because there is the cruelty of that way of thinking is obvious. But if we keep pointing it out, I'm hoping that people will change them, and I think there is redemptive qualities.
Well, and on that front, the example that you touch in the film when it comes to gender and this guy John Money of Hopkins is so telling. I've heard of this before, but I never heard it laid out the way you guys did in the film. Can you tell us, Kurt, about John Money of Hopkins and what happened with his experiment in 1967 and how it's held up by people who are telling us we should let our kids determine their gender and that it's not related to their biological sex? And they hold this up as an example of why that's true, and they don't reveal the ending.
Yep. So in 1967, which I'm going to go by your quotation because I actually forgot, in around the late 1960s or early 1970s, John Money was a proponent of gender fluidity, and so something which means that that's a child's gender or a person's gender, because it's predicated on what they are when they're younger, is socialized into them. And so what we can do is we can do a standard twin example. So those are considered textbook best cases Although the best cases are when twins are raised separately. But anyway, there were twins who, one of which had a botched circumcision, and the parents wanted to know, how do I raise my child ordinarily, make them not have psychological issues? And then they reached out to John Money, and John Money said, okay, how about we raise one child? I believe his name was Brandon. We raise him as a her, call her Brenda, give her, she pronouns. And even when they were young, let's reenact some sexual positions on the children, which is, well, you can think what you like about that. When they're right, when they're late, basically tweens, the pre-teens and tweens, with their clothes on, but still. So it reinforces, you're the brother, you're the male example, and then Brenda, you're the female. Brenda had many psychological issues, as well as the brother. And Brenda eventually ended up realizing what happened, because it was so young that Brenda had forgotten. And then switching Brenda's name back to Brandon, I believe, or back to a male gender. And then years later, killing himself. And it's no longer touted as a success story, was touted. And what's happened is that the citations of what are pro gender fluidity and so on reference what references the original study, or references what references. And even nowadays, there was a modern study, I think I referenced one from the past 2 years, which said that, well, it's still an example of a success story because Brenda didn't self-express this gender change. So that means that you can't force someone into a gender change, and you must believe someone when they, as a child, say that they're of a different gender.
But that's kind of happening right now. We're seeing all these parents take a child's innocent remark about, I want to wear a dress for a little boy, which lots of little boys say, and it doesn't mean anything about being transgender, and then start pushing them into a new gender, which I do think is abusive. We've gotten to this very strange, almost intolerant place when it comes to gender roles, which turns everything we used to know on its head, right? We used to not say, oh, if a little boy likes pink, that means he's a girl. We used to say that's just that, that's too, don't be such a gender, I don't know, don't put kids into unnecessary gender roles, right? Boys can like pink and girls can like trucks.
When I was 10 when I was 7, I remember my mom saying, do you want to marry someone when you grow up? And I remember saying, I want to marry my sister. And so if I was to be taken seriously, they're like, okay, yes, you should marry your sister, by the extreme left. Or I want to marry you, Mom.
Right, exactly. That's still where I want my boys to be, but the big reveal will come one day. But I want to pick up on something you said, because I do think that's a great point in the film where you sort of say, what about me? I'm an immigrant. I have brown skin. Am I higher up in the social hierarchy where I get to have opinions that, the white cisgender men might not have on college campuses? And here's how you put it in the film.
I thought, well, what about me? I'm an immigrant. Don't my views count? And it turns out they do if I subscribe to the precepts of the extreme left. But if I don't, then I'm a racist and self-loathing immigrant who acts and speaks white and makes a documentary that justifies white supremacy. And by doing so, denies the lived experience of the truly oppressed.
I love that, because that's exactly right. Your views, sure, all of your status as, a man, an immigrant with brown skin, that will definitely count for you if you subscribe to their worldview. Otherwise, you need to take a seat and be quiet.
Right. Man, when I hear that, I forgot how the film was, because I haven't seen it in years. It's pretty articulate.
Yeah. Well, it really brings it home. And you tell me, Desh, because you guys taking on these issues so head on has not been all that well received by, for example, the big tech world, which I understand has given you some trouble about trying to advertise the film.
Yeah, this has been unusually challenging. With another independent film under my belt, I had a pretty good idea how to get the film out using the digital channels available, but we could not get a single ad running. We couldn't even pay to get this film in front of people. Facebook prevented, basically locked every single account that tried to run an ad. So we couldn't put a single ad. Google stopped all of our ads, and they labeled our ads hateful and range of other strange titles, reasons. Twitter didn't let our ads run. YouTube eventually let a teaser run, but again, the reach was very minimal, and even our organic posts were, you could clearly see the algorithm is doing something to minimize the reach. We were extremely lucky because the likes of Jordan Peterson, Steven Pinkers actually liked the movie and they amplified. But it has been incredibly challenging to get the movie out because every usual avenue. I actually want to reveal something I haven't really publicly acknowledged. The PR firm we had for this film, the same PR firm that helped us get Islam and the Future of Tolerance to a large audience, said yes to the film because the two founders loved it. And then we pretty much signed agreements and everything. And just before we were ready to go out, I get an email saying, hey, the team has seen the movie and they're very uncomfortable by the subject matter and everything you're talking about. We are pulling out.
Oh no.
So that was a huge blow for us because we had, big reliance on those guys because they, they're pretty big agency. And I called them and I said, hey, I thought you two loved the movie. And they said, we still stand by our statement. It's just our team feels otherwise.
This is so crazy. So did you wind up getting anybody to help you with PR?
No, I spoke to so many agencies. The initial call is always warm and nice, and we eventually send them a copy to watch, and then we get ghosted. Even if they like the film, we are in an environment that you don't want to publicly acknowledge. I have a famous journalist, scientists who absolutely love the movie, who would personally message me and say, mate, love the movie, but please don't tell anyone that I told you that. We actually released a number of those comments with anonymizing their names because it's crazy the sheer number of people that have personally messaged us, famous comedians, etc., but wouldn't say it publicly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we've seen this. I was just talking about this. You are not allowed to have certain opinions right now. And unless we start fighting back against that and expressing our unpopular, quote unquote, unpopular opinions, we're all going to be silenced. And what you find when you speak out with your quote unquote unpopular opinion is that it's not as unpopular as you think. Millions of people share your views, but they don't have the liberty to express them. They fear getting fired. They fear getting ostracized. We just interviewed a guy last week who was talking about life in Cuba and how if you say something against, the government there, you could find out that your apartment lease is no longer in effect, right? You no longer have a place to live. It's not quite that extreme here, but we're going down that path. I mean, people are losing their livelihoods for quote wrongthink. So that's why the film is so important. Now, I don't understand, and it actually isn't controversial at all. I mean, it really isn't. It doesn't take issue with the left. It takes issue with the extreme left and the extreme right.
Right.
And that's the irony of the whole situation, isn't it? The irony of the situation is that people judge the movie by the people who are involved, and they make assumptions. And by a trailer, if you really watch it, if you go through the painstaking detail we've gone through here to explain what we're talking about, it's you can have a philosophical argument of your disliking or disagreement, but that's the point. We're not trying to tell people that you have to agree with what we are saying. We're simply presenting a certain set of philosophical and intellectual arguments that we haven't seen, and that involves the political far left. And that's an unusual thing. And we're realizing the way people are pushing back is the exact point we are making. Hey, somehow we've come to a place that you can't talk about it. Just similar to what you said, Megyn, about in Cuba. In Sri Lanka, when I was growing up in Sri Lanka, it was one of the worst places for a journalist. We used to have the white van syndrome. A journalist would say something, or a person would say something, and literally 2 days later, a van will arrive. And that was the last we've seen or heard of that person. My dad was involved in politics, and there was about 5 years of my life he wasn't in my life. I thought, he had another life or something, but I recently found out it was because of his political beliefs. People wanted to make him disappear, so he went into hiding. So we don't want to live in the problem is in the West, people are too comfortable. In the West, we have this extraordinary ability to say what we want to say, do what we want to do, for the most part, within the Enlightenment values and the rules and laws that we've agreed to, and still have a life, and the state doesn't get to take things away or murder you, your family. That doesn't happen. So its West's own success is paradoxically it becoming its enemy. Through this ability to speak freely, people are then trying to find the villain, and the left, because of the Marxist way of thinking, just you need to find the other. And even the slightest inkling of this person could be a fascist, right? So that then gives them credence to fight as hard as one could. And that's why the language is so important, and that's why words have become violent now. So the point I really wanted to make is that is far removed from actual violence and actually what a state can do. And for me personally, just living through in a state through a civil war, what really happens is far worse than what people realize.
Thanks for staying with us this far, the end of the episode. And who's coming up on our next show is right after this quick break. The movie ends on a note of, now what? Like, how do we solve it? And it's a philosophical point that seems to be asking, is there a role for faith? You talk about myth, religion. Is there a way we sort of keep, I don't know, old faith alive as opposed to this new religion of wokeness, and square it with science and go forward with rationality and logic and reason and all things that we used to accept, real truth, before, quote, postmodernism came along? And I was really thinking about that. I mean, I don't know, because we've talked a lot on this show about whether chasing religion out of the public square has been really detrimental. It's that void is getting filled by things like wokeness, and we were better off when we had, faith in whatever your particular religion was, but God and a higher power and subjugation of the self. So what do you think? I mean, what do you think is the solution, Kurt?
Right. You mentioned that at the end of the movie, it ends not with a statement, which I hoped it would. I was trying to come to a firm conclusion and an action, call to action, but I couldn't come up with one. I came up with a question, which is, what is the modern religion? And the reason why I say that, even though many people listening may identify with atheism, or at least as true modern religion, or any religion, as being dogmatic and ancient superstition, the reason I say that is that there seems to be this need, a spiritual need. Also, when we talk about, see, me and Desh disagree here. Desh would say what we need is dialogue above all else. But for me, what I would say is, for you to want dialogue, you have to value dialogue. And you also have to value something in common, which is that through truthful dialogue, you'll come to something salubrious or nourishing. And it's not exactly rational. It's something pre-rational. So I don't agree that logic and rationality are the way, and even reason, though it depends on how one uses the word reason. I don't agree that that's the way forward. I think there's something before that, because you have to value those. And then the question is, well, how do you engender that in a large society? I don't know. And to just say, well, go to church. Well, it's not as if every church member is a upholder of these values. And second, it's not as if the modern person can go to church. They're based in fundamental ontological claims that God exists and so on. That doesn't ring true for many people. We're not at that stage. And Richard Feynman even said this, that this is the exigent moral problem of our day, which is, how do we retain this spiritual nature, this benign and beatific nature, and not, while we're modern people?
Right.
I don't know.
That's what's so poignant about the movie. It leaves you with that question, right? How do we fill this void that everybody's trying to fill, and still stay fact-based, as those of us who are not considered woke tend to be. We still tend to follow logic, reason, believe there's real truth, there's knowable fact. It raises a lot of questions, but what I love is that it really does give you a forensic look at how we got here. And I will tell you that my audience asks me that all the time. Spend some time talking about how we got here. How did they do this? It's not all about what happened on college campuses. It's more widespread than that. And if you look back historically, you'll really see where the roots of this movement are and how pernicious they are. You guys are brilliant. You did a great job with this. And if people want to watch the movie, what should they do, Desh? They go to the website now, since you're not getting any love from Google and everybody else. Tell us exactly how we can find it.
Yes. The movie is available on iTunes and Google Play and Vudu, but you can also go to betterleftunsaidfilm.com. And I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak. And I'm sure a lot of people will discover the film because of this conversation. As independent filmmakers, this is amazing. So thank you. This will reach people. I really appreciate that.
It's my honor. And truly, I would not have put you on if I didn't love the film, because I have an ongoing relationship with my audience. I can't mislead. I won't even take an advertiser that I don't really believe in the product. So I really want them to check it out. I think it's riveting, and it's emotional at times. It's gripping. Some of the footage is disturbing, but in an important way. So you can sort of see the outcome of, let's say, Lenin's ideas. But it's worth your time. Well worth your time. That's only an hour and a half. So it's not some huge 3-hour epic. It's an hour and a half, and you'll learn something and you'll feel something. And what more do you want out of a day?
May I say one more statement?
Yeah.
The reason why to visit the website instead of buying from Vudu or Google or iTunes is not only does more of the money actually go to the filmmakers, but because you get access to the director's cut, which has 30 minutes of extra footage, particularly in chapter 4, where I talk about a potential solution. Right now, I said that the answer is I don't know, but what I've come up with as to how can we share the same myth is to embody the myth of truth telling. That is, to not lie, to try your hardest at every instant to not deceive. Every single instance, whether that's you're returning a package to Amazon and you lie about the reason because you just simply want to return, or whether it's out of politeness. Every act of deceit perverts the world, and then it comes back in a concrete sense to influence you. They have ramifications and they replicate. Each lie replicates. And then something I didn't pursue in the film because there wasn't enough time is pursuing love and loving thy enemy. One of the stories in the Bible that most resonates to me is Jesus was getting taken away. See, some people want to say, yeah, you should stand up against the extreme left. And what they mean is to go in the streets and almost violently stand up to them. But what happened was Jesus was being taken away and about to be tortured. And he knew he was. So this goes back to ancient myths and taking inspiration from them. And he knew this, and he still submitted himself to it. And then Peter, his friend, cut off the ear of his enemy, cut off the ear of the handler who was going to torture Jesus or take him away to be tortured. And Jesus said, don't do that, and took the ear and healed his enemy. Not only love thy enemy, heal thy enemy. So living in a loving manner, loving thy enemy, even though you dislike them, and not lying, which is distinct from telling the truth. I put an emphasis on not lying. I think that's the path forward. Do that in one's private life, and that has wide-reaching societal implications.
I love it. It's well said, and it's good advice. And whether it solves the problems or not, it's good advice. Guys, thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Don't miss the show on Monday. Have a great weekend, but don't miss the show on Monday because we've got Sean Parnell, decorated officer and Senate candidate in Pennsylvania. He's got a great story and great perspective on life. We're looking forward to that. Have a great weekend. In the meantime, before I let you go, please go to Apple and give us a review. We hit 20,000. Yay! That's actually really good for a show that's only been on the air for less than a year. So we're proud of our reviews and our ratings. We'd love a 5-star rating from you. But while you're on there, give us a review because I have read all 20,000 of them and counting. And I would love to see you take us up to 21,000. Maybe we could do it this weekend. Get on there. Let us know what you think. And we'll see you Monday. Thanks for listening to The Megyn Kelly Show. No BS, no agenda, and no fear. The Megyn Kelly Show is a Devil May Care media production in collaboration with Red Seat Ventures.